Okay, let's get started. Hopefully you watched the video I sent the link to the other day. I'm not going to ask who did or not. I'm going to spend a few minutes to go over some of that, or to add to what I said in that previous lecture. Some of this will come up as we get into the play, but a little bit more background information. There are three great Greek tragedians or tragic authors. Aeschylus is the first or earliest. He's born around 525 BC. Sophocles next, and then Euripides. Okay? Sophocles is alive during Aeschylus's life. Euripides is alive during Sophocles' life. They each kind of build upon the other. Aeschylus, excuse me, was the first dramatist to introduce a second speaker in a play, other than the chorus. You had the chorus, but you had primarily one speaker, so it's more or less a monologue. Okay, Aeschylus introduces a second major speaker, so you can have actual dialogue between them. Sophocles introduces a third speaker. Okay, again, not the chorus. Okay, but an actual third speaker, so you can have three characters on stage addressing each other, etc., etc. Euripides doesn't do anything like that because by that time the form is essentially set and stuff. He might expand the chorus a little bit. I can't remember. Either Euripides or Sophocles expands the number of people in a chorus. Sophocles' dates 496 to 406 BC. So, we have this notion today that everybody prior to the 18th century died in their 40s. He lived to be 90. Okay, he won his first prize award in 468. Drama gets its origins in religion, or out of religion. I didn't mention this in my other two classes. I did that part, not the part I'm about to say. Greek and Roman drama, or the first incarnation of drama, let's say, begins in the 5th century, this time period, and it dies out shortly after the fall of the Roman Empire in around 450 AD. It's gone. There's no drama being written or performed from 500 AD until about 1000, 1100. Okay? And around 1000 or 1100, we see it start again. Guess where it begins? Okay? This has its origins in the religious ceremonies of the Dionysian festivals, worship of the god Dionysius. Around 1000, 1100 AD, it starts again in a religious ceremony or religious festival, and it's in the Christian church. And it's in the services leading up to and including Easter. And it starts with two people, readers, reading passages of the New Testament to each other. And the passages of the New Testament are for the Easter morning liturgy or celebration or mass, if you want to call it that. And one character reads the words of what are called the myrrh-bearing women, the women who run to the tomb of Jesus on the day of his resurrection. And they see the stone rolled open, and there's a guy sitting there, and they ask, "Where have you laid our Lord?" And he responds, "He's not here, he's in Galilee." That's the beginning of the second incarnation of drama, because that gets added onto, and we start to get we're going to see when we get a little later, we start to get plays built around this and other biblical themes. Okay? And then from there on, it just pretty much stays alive. It dies out for a few years during the Renaissance. We'll talk about that later. But it's interesting. Both times it rises out of religious devotion. Okay? And by the way, all drama means, the word drama means is essentially to act or to portray. So you're portraying something. Okay? They all wrote a lot of plays. Oedipus won a bunch of these first place awards at the Dionysian revels. In 468, I mentioned Sophocles wins it. He defeats Aeschylus, so that's kind of passing on of the torch or baton to the young whippersnapper, because, I mean, Sophocles is only 28 at that point. Aeschylus is really old by then, 25 and 30, not that old, 58. But Sophocles wins the first place many times. I think Euripides wins it a few. Like I said, they all wrote a lot of plays. Sophocles, we know, wrote over 120 plays. And the way we know that is because they are referred to by title. Only 7 of those survive. Okay? I was telling my class yesterday, when Mount Vesuvius erupted and destroyed Pompeii in whatever, 777, whatever year that was, AD, it also destroyed a town called Herculaneum, which is near Pompeii. This place was discovered in late 1700s, 1800 or so, okay? And among the things that is buried there in Herculaneum is this huge Roman villa that I was reading an article yesterday, originally belonged to Julius Caesar's father-in-law. Okay, Caesar died in 44 BC. So he married his wife, obviously before then. This has only been partially dug, archaeological dig. Very, very small part of it has been excavated and investigated. But part that has been excavated and investigated is apparently a library of ancient, I'll use the plural, ancient papyrus scrolls, okay? Papyrus is a kind of reed that was used for writing on. These survive, but they look like this, essentially. Charcoal. Because they were not quite burned, but because of the heat of the ash and everything, they kind of like were preserved, but now they're just clumps of charcoal. 150 years ago, people tried to kind of open them. What happens when you try to break charcoal? It just, and that's exactly what happened. So they were left alone, okay? Most of these are intact, but they're in little climate control things in Italy and in the UK, Oxford, and British Museum, and some other places. About 20 years ago, a guy came up with the idea of trying to decipher what is in these using CT scans, computerized tomography, and spectroscopes and all that kind of stuff. And they started to be able to get little bits of information. Well, couple of years ago, about 3 or 4 years ago, a couple of very wealthy people started this new project of deciphering these. And then last year, the group that started that project announced a competition. If you can decipher, and I think it was something like 7 lines of text, you'll win an award. And the award is like $750,000. 3 students won. Different universities, okay? But they all came up with parts of it. All that is to get to, we now have some of the technology. We're getting to where we can, without literally touching these things, can, through artificial intelligence and other technologies, unroll them and see what's written on both sides of the scripts, okay? They found, of the papyri, they found the first one that was partially deciphered. Is all about, how to have a happy life, what brings pleasure and things like that. But it is thought, and this is why I brought all this up, it is thought that probably in this library, again, only a small part has been investigated. And there are several hundred of these clumps of charcoal. It's thought that there can literally be thousands. And what might be in there are lost plays by all of these guys, lost writings by Aristotle, lost writings by Plato and other great Greek philosophers, mathematicians, musicians, Pythagoras. We don't have anything of Pythagoras from prior to the 9th century AD. So there could be, among all this stuff, all kinds of stuff that we have no early records of. Okay? So, pretty important kind of stuff. So Sophocles wrote over 120 plays. The 3 most famous plays that he wrote, however, are these 3. Okay? This is the date that it is thought the plays were first performed. So in 442, the play Antigone was first performed. Sometime between 429 420, your book gives a date of 430. Okay? Most scholars aren't that sure, so they kind of give this range. 429 to 420, Oedipus the King was first performed. All right? And then 5 years after Sophocles' death, Oedipus at Colonus was first performed. Now, that's because this is when they were performed, that probably indicates date of composition. In other words, he wrote Antigone first. Then he writes Oedipus the King. Then he writes Oedipus at Colonus. But within the world or the action of the plots of the plays, this play comes first. Then you get this one, because Antigone is one of his daughters. Then you get Oedipus at Colonus. Oedipus at Colonus is about his death and his being made into a god by the gods. Okay? That's where this comes in, the Deus ex machina. It's one of the terms in your book, pages, I think 1077 to 79, have a bunch of terms in bold print, and then everything from 1120 through Oedipus, there are bold terms and there are terms in italic about the structure of the plays, the 5 parts of a Greek play. Okay, all the terms in bold and the 5 parts of a Greek play that are in italics, you need to know for quiz, exam, that kind of thing. Right? So Deus ex machina, it's one of the terms, literally means God from the machine. Because in the ancient Greek theater, and there's a picture of this very crude drawing in your book of the ancient theater at Delphi. They still produce plays there every summer. This thing holds, it was thought that in ancient Greece, it would hold 15,000 people or so. People are larger now than they were then. Now it holds 10 or 12,000. Okay? But in this Greek theater, so here's the stage, here's the building at the back of the stage called the Scani. That's where people come in and exit. And it's also where they put on costumes and stuff. Out in front of it is this round area called the orchestra. That's where the chorus does its job. Notice today what we mean by orchestra are the musicians who sit in what's called the orchestra pit. Okay? Not what was meant here. So in some of these theaters, the Scani would have like a overhang. You know, like you could sit out on your porch and you got a roof over you. And from that overhang, there would be a door and a rope could be lowered. Or a swing. And with somebody sitting on the swing, like a god. And the god would come down and, you know, I'm being facetious and proverbial here, wave a wand, and whatever the problem is would be resolved. Aristotle, when he uses, Aristotle's when he uses that term. Aristotle, when he uses that term, he's ripping it. He doesn't like that. He says poor plays use this kind of machinery to solve the problems. Why? Human experience, ancient Greek experience, how often do the gods come to your rescue? They don't. We're stuck here, so to speak. I mean, think of what the misfit said. He wouldn't be the way he is, what? If he'd been alive back then. But notice, no, Jesus doesn't arrive and go, misfit, I'm here, you know, believe, kind of thing. Okay, so that's not a good thing. Oedipus at Colonus, the god from the machine, is used to raise Oedipus up. That swing or rope that comes down, they place Oedipus, and he rises up and becomes engodded, made into a god. Okay? Dramatic, tragic irony, we've talked about that before, where a character says something, not knowing the truth of what he says. The audience knows. And when I say the audience, I mean the people sitting in the seats, not the people within the world of the play. So Oedipus, we're going to see early on, Oedipus, when he pronounces his curse on the killer of Laius, the audience out here, they know exactly what he's talking about. And they know every word he says is like a dagger in his own heart. He's just unaware of it. The people within the world of the play, they don't have a clue about that, all right? A couple other things. Aristotle, in the book Poetics, this is all in the introduction to Oedipus, talks about the three unities. And what he means there is that every Greek tragedy, I'm going to rephrase that. Every good Greek tragedy follows some basic rules. These are not rules Aristotle creates. These are rules that Aristotle deduces on the basis of having read a bunch of Greek plays, and he sees these things follow. So you have the unity of time, place, and action. Time. Everything that occurs in the play occurs within a 24-hour period. So the action of the actual play all occurs within 24 hours. From the very first word by Oedipus, at the beginning of the play, to the very last word of the chorus, only 24 hours go by. Okay? Place. There's one location. Everything in this play happens right here, and I don't mean here on the stage. I mean right here in front of the palace. It's all there. There's no change. Okay? Action, one, plot. What's the basic overall plot of this play? What's the central, in that sense, problem to be solved in the play? Find Laius's killer. It's it. Now that's not necessarily the central conflict. It's the central problem of the plot. Because I'm going to suggest in just a couple minutes. The central conflict is between Oedipus and what? Fate. How many of you know the basic story of Oedipus? How many have read it? Preparation for today. Okay. That's fine. I didn't think anybody would have. The basic story, which this audience would have completely known. Why? It was a myth. This myth probably went back 1,000 years at least before Sophocles writes his version of the story. Okay? And the basic myth is this. Here's a king and queen of Thebes. Thebes is a Greek town. And she's pregnant. His name is Laius. Her name is Jocasta. And they receive a prophecy. The prophecy comes from the oracle at Delphi. The oracle at Delphi is Apollo speaking through a human. Okay? And that oracle says, the child that is within your womb, Jocasta, will kill you, Laius, and marry you, Jocasta, and you'll have children with this child, who at that point will be a man. And they're like, no, thank you. So when the baby is delivered, they don't abort it. There was abortion in ancient Greece. Gruesome. They don't abort it. But when the baby is delivered, Laius has the baby's ankles nailed together. So get a long spike and drive it through the outside of one ankle, through that ankle entirely, into the other ankle, and outside the other one. And then take the baby to the mountain, it's called Mount Kithaeron, outside Thebes, and leave it. Leave it to die. this practice is still practiced today. Not the nailing of the ankles, but leaving babies on a mountainside or in an alley to die in some cultures. I don't mean somebody who gets pregnant, has, and doesn't want to keep and just dumps it in an alley. This is like sanctioned, okay by the culture, the one I'm talking about. India, for example, this happens still, okay? Largest population in the world. So, the baby gets left, but there's another person on the mountain when the baby gets left. That person takes the baby, okay, and takes him back to the town he lives at, which is named Corinth. And the king and queen of Corinth raise that child as their own. The child gets the name Oedipus. Why? Because the name Oedipus means clubfoot. He's called clubfoot because if you know anything about how human bones heal, they build more calcium. They build more bone material around an injury. And so his feet are swollen like clubs. That's why he also walks with a limp. Okay? So he gets raised by the king and queen of that town. Their names are Polybus and Merope. We're going to see all this later. When the boy is older, teenager, there's a party and a drunk stands up and calls Oedipus a bastard. He doesn't use bastard like we use it, colloquially today, like you rotten bastard. He means literal. You are not the son of your father. Well, that kind of bothers Oedipus. He goes and asks his parents, they say, don't worry about it, he's a drunk. Yes, you're our son, we love you very much, blah, blah. It still bothers him. He goes to the oracle at Delphi. And the oracle at Delphi tells him, you are fated to kill your father, sleep with your mother, and bring to light a brood of children that should never see the light of day. Why? Those children will be what to him? Obviously his children, but what else? His siblings. So his sons and daughters are his brothers and sisters. His mother is his wife. Okay? Even in ancient Greece, that wasn't looked on positively. Okay? So he's like, no. Put yourself in Oedipus' shoes. You love your parents, and you're told you're going to kill your father and sleep with your mother. What do? Run away as fast and as far as you can. And that's exactly what he does. And as he's running away, getting away, he comes upon a crossroads. He's on one of the roads, and there's a crossroad. And a man on a wagon with 6 guards are coming from the other direction. And both these guys are testosterone, fueled, stubborn, arrogant, pig-headed, and neither of them will move. So they get into a fight. Oedipus kills them all, but one. One of the guards escapes. Okay? That guard runs back to Thebes, tells everybody Laius is dead, but he can't say anything more other than some thieves. We're going to find out very quickly. Thieves did it, but he can't say anything more than it's like he has PTSD. Okay? At some point after that, Oedipus arrives at Thebes. Now, between the time when Laius left Thebes and Oedipus arrives at Thebes, a sphinx, S-P-H-I-N-X, has come and taken up residence outside the main gate. Okay? Like the Sphinx on the plain of Giza outside Cairo. Head of a man, body of a lion. And the Sphinx demands from Thebes tribute. Every day, either the people of Thebes need to throw him a person to eat, or someone to come out and attempt to solve the riddle. The riddle of the Sphinx is what goes on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs in the afternoon, 3 legs in the evening. They can't figure it out. And apparently this happens, it sounds like at the very least, for weeks, okay, before Oedipus arrives. Oedipus arrives, the Sphinx gives him his riddle. Oedipus is like, well, that's easy, that's a man. 4 legs as a baby, 2 legs as an adult, 3 legs walking with a cane. Sphinx disappears. Oedipus is hailed as a conquering hero, welcomed into the city. And because the previous king is dead and Oedipus has defeated their mighty enemy, Oedipus is made king, which means he gets the queen. He marries the queen and they have children. Okay? And a plague descends on the city. So, that's the general story of the myth. Okay? And the myth goes on to Oedipus finding out himself. On a stone, supposedly, outside the oracle of Delphi, was inscribed the phrase in Greek, know thyself. Know who you are. Okay? What's Oedipus's problem at the beginning of the myth, let's say? He finds out something about himself, but he doesn't know who he is. So he goes to the oracle to find out who he is. And he finds out who he is, not from the oracle, he finds out what he's fated to do. So what does Oedipus attempt to do? Can you escape fate? Can you escape destiny? Can you do an end run? According to the Greek belief system, so I have this, you can't. So you have us here, let's say this room is all of human existence, and out there are two powerful forces, the gods and fate. Neither of those is more powerful than the other. Neither of those controls the other. But the gods can see what fate has in store for humanity. And they use that to play tricks with us. Notice what the gods don't tell fate, don't tell Oedipus when he goes to the oracle. Oedipus, sit down. Let's have a chat. I'm going to tell you everything. What do they tell him? You're fated to sleep with your mother and kill your father. What does he not know? This involves my definition of tragedy. This was on the video. Tragedy occurs when you have a protagonist who is forced by circumstances to make a decision and take an action when he or she doesn't have all the necessary information to make the decision or take the action. You've got a different definition of tragedy in your book. They both work, okay? I think mine's a little bit better. What information does Oedipus not have? What does the oracle not tell him? Polybus and Merope are not your parents. If he'd known he was adopted, what could he have done? Gone back home and lived happily ever after in Corinth. But because he thinks they're his parents, he leaves. What does he do? By leaving, he brings his fate. So is it fate? Or is fate just another way of talking about what we bring upon ourselves by our own actions? Okay? So, that's that. Caresis, I'll talk about in just a moment. So, play opens. The video lecture went through about line 150 or so. So I'm not going to go over that again. So watch that if you haven't. So Oedipus, the play opens with Oedipus. He comes out of the palace, okay? And he sees the priest and a bunch of children, and they're praying at his altar. And he says, what are you doing here praying at my altar? They talk to him. He says, yeah, I know the city's in bad times. There's a plague and all that kind of stuff. And they keep talking, and Oedipus says, I'm well ahead of you. I've already sent Crayon. I'm on lines 85 and following. I've already sent Crayon to the oracle of Delphi for the gods to tell me this in your book. This is page 11, 30, 31 or so. 11, 29 or 30. He says, I already sent Crayon to the oracle. Who's Crayon? Crayon is his wife's brother. Okay? His wife is Jocasta. She's also, as I just mentioned, his mother. So Creon is his uncle slash brother-in-law. He's not aware of that part yet. He says, I sent Creon to the oracle to find out what the god says to do about her plague problem. And he says there, line 85 and following, I'm going by the PDF version. He says, today, he should be back by now. Where is he? And the priest says, there he is. Look, he's coming right now. Okay? So, Creon says, Oedipus, Creon, prince, my kinsman, what do you bring us? What message from the gods? What solution to our problem? And Creon says, good news. I tell you, even the hardest things to bear, if they should turn out well, all would be well. So, good news sounds good, right? I've got the solution. But then he next says those next two lines, which are kind of enigmatic. They're kind of a riddle. I tell you, even the hardest things to bear, if they turn out well, then all would be well. Oh, okay. So that means bad news. If everything turns out okay, then it's okay. In other words, then it's not really bad news. Oedipus, of course, but what were the gods' words? In other words, okay, that doesn't answer the question. There's no hope and nothing to fear in what you've said so far. Notice, there's no hope, no solution to the problem, and there's nothing to fear either. That is, you haven't said anything that scares us. In other words, we're not in any different situation than we were before I sent you. Because they had no hope then. But there really wasn't anything else new to fear. Okay? So, look at Creon's response. If you want my report in the presence of these people, and he points to the priests and the children, I'm ready now, or we might go inside. Why does he say that? Why does he suggest going inside? Let's update it. Let's say this is today. And Creon is Secretary of State. And Oedipus is Joe Biden. Not even in his best days, Joe Biden wasn't even close. So what's the situation? When he comes and addresses Biden outside the White House, the palace, who else would be there? Priests and children? A phalanx of reporters, right? CNN, Fox, MSNBC, all of them. The wackos as well as the not so wackos. All right? With microphones and cameras and beamed to satellite around the world because let's say this is a major problem, so to speak. What has the Secretary of State just said to the President? Well, I can tell you this in front of all these cameras and the whole world, or we can step inside of the Oval Office. Why? What is he showing? And I chose the Secretary of State intentionally. Diplomacy, subtlety. There's some things the President takes publicly, hears publicly. And there's some things the President, aka the King, should only hear behind closed doors. Now, why is what Creon says worthy of only hearing behind closed doors? Does Creon name the killer? Nope. What does he say? When Oedipus says, speak out, speak to us all. I grieve for these my people far more than I fear for my own life. He is on the borderline there of dramatic or tragic irony. On the border. He hasn't said anything. He hasn't really revealed any real truth that he's unaware of. or that the audience is aware of. That's why I said he's so close. So, Creon says, all right, I'll tell you what. Here's what Apollo says. Drive the corruption from the land. Okay? Don't harbor it any longer, root it out, etc. Oedipus, how do we do that? How do we drive the corruption? How do we cleanse ourselves? Okay? Creon, banish the man or pay back blood with blood. Banish what man? Why isn't he speaking clearly? Why doesn't he just come out and say it? So Oedipus says, who? What man? Whose fate does Apollo bring to light? Notice, bring, where is it? Bring to light. You're going to get these binaries, these oppositions throughout the play, and they're closely linked. Being in the light versus being in the dark. Having sight versus being blind. Because we're going to have a central character, I'll give it away right now, Oedipus, who is in the light and who sees, but who is totally in the dark and blind. And then we're going to meet Tiresias in just a moment, who is in the dark because he doesn't have eyes, and so he has darkness all around him. And yet he's in the light because he sees, not with these, but with this perfectly. See, he's a prophet, and that means he's not only a foreteller telling the future, he's a forth teller. He speaks the truth. He never lies. Tiresias is another mythic character. He shows up in Homer's Odyssey. Okay? Homer, if there was a real poet named Homer, Homer's probably from the 8th century. So roughly 400 years before Sophocles. But the events Homer is describing probably occurred, according to most archaeologists, literary historians, sometime around the years 1500 to 1200 BC. Okay. We know Troy, the city of Troy, suffered one of its destructions during that period. There are at least 7 cities of Troy, all built one upon the other. Okay? The oldest one goes back, I don't remember, something 1500, 1600 BC. Destroyed, burned down, one of them destroyed by an earthquake, we know, and they just keep rebuilding on top of it. Tiresias goes back to that period. All right? Major character. Here's why. In all of Greek literature, when Tiresias is mentioned, he's never wrong. Not once. Okay? So, whose fate? Creon says, our leader was a man named Laius. You wouldn't have known him before you came. He said, yeah, I've heard about this guy. Never saw him myself. That's tragic irony. Yes, he did see him himself. And all of the audience out here, they know he saw him. Because not only was Laius his father, but they already know Oedipus killed him. Well, he was killed. Apollo commands us now to, pay the killers back. Oedipus, 123 or so. Where are they? Okay. Notice, Creon, pay the killers, plural, back. Oedipus, where are they? Multiple killers. We're to find now the trail of the ancient guild. Why is it ancient guild? How long ago was Laius murdered? We're never told specifically, but we do have some details within the poem that lead to this was an old crime. Here's those details. We're going to find out within the course of the poem, Oedipus has had several children. The 2 that live with him now are young girls, possibly prepubescent, possibly adolescent. Okay? But they're young enough to still be at home and being cared for by their parents. They have, I think it's 7 older brothers. All the older brothers are old enough to have left home. fact, they're talked about as not being in Thebes anymore. Okay? So it's like they've gone off to make their way in the world. There's another play, I think it's by Sophocles, called Seven Against Thebes. And it's about these 7 kings who attack Thebes. Some of those are Oedipus's sons. Okay? So, let's assume they left home at 16, 17, 18, at least that many years. Probably because they weren't, sextuplets. If they had 7 children, they're probably 16 to 25 or so. So 25 years have gone by since Elias's death. This is a cold, cold case. How are you going to find what? That's what Oedipus is wondering about. How are we going to find him? Crayon. Here in Thebes. Notice it's in quotation marks. They didn't have quotation marks in ancient Greece. Okay? So why is that in quotation marks? He said, the oracle said, the killers are in Thebes. Okay, so that makes it a bit easier. And then he says, whatever suffer can be caught, whatever is neglected slips away. Again, a riddle. What does it mean? If you look for Elias's killers, what? You'll find them. The flip side of that is, if they get away, what? You didn't really look. Okay? Oedipus. But where? In the palace, the fields, or foreign soil? He's not asking, but where are they? In the palace, in the fields, or in foreign soil? Because he gets to the object of that question at the end. Where did Elias meet his bloody death? Why does he mention palace first? Why would you assume the king was killed at his own home? That would imply conspirators, okay? I think there's another reason. Aeschylus wrote 3 plays dealing with the family of Agamemnon. Okay? Agamemnon himself, who I'm going to talk about in a moment, his son Orestes, and his sister Electra. Okay? So we got to talk about the Trojan War for a moment. According to the myth about the Trojan War, this is from Homer, Agamemnon is the leader of a tribe of Greeks called the Achaeans. He has a brother, his brother's named Menelaus, okay? And his brother's married to a woman named Helen. Helen is gorgeous. The most beautiful woman ever lived. In fact, there was a quote-unquote beauty contest, so to speak, among the goddesses. Make sure I get them right. I think it's Aphrodite, Hera, and Athena. Aphrodite, goddess of love. Venus in the Roman system. Hera, the queen of the gods. Juno in the Roman system. I might have those two reversed. And Athena, the goddess of wisdom. Okay? None of them won. Helen was determined to be the most beautiful. Goddesses don't like that. They get jealous of things like that. So, a man named Paris, who's the son of the king of Troy, one of the sons of the king of Troy, he's got a brother named Hector, okay? Father's name's Priam. Paris comes and kidnaps Helen. Well, that's the publicized version. That's the media version. The real story, according to the Greek version, is Helen's kind of loose. Let's say she thinks of her marriage to Menelaus as an open marriage. Okay, He doesn't. She runs off with Paris of Troy. Menelaus goes to his big brother and says, I want her back. Big brother, Agamemnon, raises an army. They're going to sail a fleet to Troy, and that's the basis, that's why the Trojan War occurs, where we hear all the stuff about Achilles and etc. So they're getting ready, they've got their ships loaded, they've got their soldiers, they've got their armor, everything they need, but they can't get a wind. They're at port, no wind will fill the sails. They pray and pray and pray. Finally, word comes to them from an oracle. In order to get a fair wind, you have to Agamemnon, have to sacrifice your daughter. Sacrifice, kill. Offer her to the gods, to Poseidon, if I remember correctly. And he's like, no, I'm not going to do that. Sorry, Paris. I'm not going to, sorry, Menelaus, I'm not going to do that. Time goes by. He eventually does. Slaughters his daughter. Euripides writes a play called Iphigenia, that's the daughter's name, at Aulis. That's the place where she's sacrificed. Okay? Winds come up. Boats sail, they go off, they fight the Trojan War for 10 years, and Agamemnon comes back. Okay, here's what's happening in Argos, the town that Agamemnon lives at, when he's off fighting the war. Well, he leaves his nephew in charge, okay, with his wife. His nephew's young, hot, and he and the wife have an affair. They were probably having it before Agamemnon left, okay? By the way, so you've got a bit of incest there. The whole family, they're called the House of Atreus. That's the great-great-great-granddaddy. The whole family in Greek mythology is totally screwed up. You know, we talk about incestuous things in parts of the deep south. Nothing on this family. I mean, great-granddaddy killed his brother's children, chopped them up, cooked them in a stew, fed them to the brother. The brother pronounced a curse, and that curse has been going on. All right? So, Agamemnon comes home from the war. And wife and nephew have plotted against him. They're going to kill him. So he gets off his chariot, or his chariot comes onto the stage, and they roll out something that you've all seen before. You may not have seen it individually or personally, but if you've ever seen any kind of awards shows, Grammys, country music, Oscars, etc., Tonys, what do the celebrities walk on as they're making their way into the theater? The red carpet. That red carpet, that goes back 3,000 years. That's the only reason they don't walk on a yellow carpet or green carpet or blue or brown. They walk on red. Why? Ancient Greek mythology and cultural beliefs, the red carpet is reserved for one class of individuals. The gods. Only the gods could walk on red carpet. Now, you think they're gods. Why do they need to walk? Why can't they float? Because when the gods take human form, they walk. Okay? So when you know a god is going to come, you roll out that red carpet. Why? So their feet don't get dirty in the dirt. Agamemnon rolls up on his chariot, and his wife rolls out the red carpet. He's like, hell no. I'm not going to step on that carpet. You know what happens to people who step on that carpet, because there are stories of people walking on the red carpet and the gods strike them dead for one simple reason. What are they saying by walking on red carpet? I'm a god, or I'm like the gods, and the gods are very, very jealous of their divinity. They strike down. That's an act of hubris, which is a term in your book. Right? Hubris is pride, but it's not pride like, hey, I got a 110 on my exam. You know, it's not that kind of pride. It's pride bordering on or including the I can never say that word, being a megalomaniac. You know, if you're an athlete, it's saying about yourself, I'm the greatest of all time. What's the problem with saying that? Always another greatest of all time comes along. Okay? Was Babe Ruth the greatest of all time? No, he was the greatest of his time. Was Michael Jackson? No. Michael Jordan, not Michael Jackson. Michael Jordan, greatest of his time, some would say. Okay? So you're ascribing characteristics to yourself that aren't appropriate. God will strike you dead. He says, where did he die? In the palace? I think Oedipus is thinking that story. Because Agamemnon doesn't get struck dead when he steps on the carpet. Carpet leads straight through into the house. And I think I've been saying in my other two classes it was the bedroom. I don't think it was the bedroom. I think it was the bath. So he's ridden from the coast. He's covered in dust. And he goes in to be bathed. He's not doing the bathing. Servants are scrubbing him. And his wife and her lover stab him. Okay? That's ascribed partially to them, but also to the gods within the course of the play. The next two plays, by the way, in that sequence, are about his son getting vengeance for his father's murder. Who does he have to get the vengeance on? His mother and her lover. How do you kill your mother? I don't mean literally. I mean, how do you kill your mother? Because there are unwritten laws about that. Patricide or matricide. You anger the gods when you do that. So the third play is about how you get justice for killing your mother, kind of a thing. All right? So, where did he die? And what does Crayon say? He went to consult an oracle. So notice how often within the play people go to consult an oracle. The story, the general story I told at the beginning, what happens? His parents hear from an oracle. Oedipus hears the prophecy. He goes to an oracle. Now we have Laius went to consult an oracle. Not the same prophecy that told him about his son, though. Okay? Because by that point, Oedipus is already a grown man. We're going to hear more. What's being said? Now, I said, the oracle had, know thyself on a stone written out in front of it. But what might the general myth be suggesting about all this emphasis on the oracle? Because you're trying to discover inner or hidden truths, and sometimes what the future will bring. The ancient Greeks might be saying, maybe you should just not delve into things you shouldn't know about and just kind of live your life fat, dumb, and happy. Would Oedipus have ever started his journey if he'd never heard the words from the drunk? No. Okay? So, they talk back and forth. I know we've only got a minute left. And Oedipus says, I will bring it all to light myself. I will solve this problem. I solved the riddle of the Sphinx. I can solve this one. Okay? The chorus comes in, and the chorus gets its first speech. And when the chorus first comes in, it slowly moves across this orchestra from one side to the other. It speaks or sings its lines. That's called the strophe. S-T-R-O-P-H-E. It then stops, and it marches back across that face. That's called the anti-strophe. Okay? The chorus's purpose is twofold. One, it comments on the action and speeches that have been said previously. And two, it gives us some foreshadowing of what's to come. What does the chorus talk about? It talks about the suffering in Thebes, it talks about great men dying, it talks about the gods, and it finishes talking about one specific god, Dionysius. Why? Because that's the festival where the play is first being performed. This is in honor of Dionysius. Okay? So Oedipus comes out. He says, you pray to the gods, let me grant your requests, or let me grant your prayers. And we will pick up there on Friday. Don't forget, exam due Friday. 45, I told my first class, there's 45 questions worth 100 points. It does have some passages to identify, as I mentioned before. There's 10 extra credit questions worth 20 points. And then I'm also going to put up, today or tomorrow, a quiz over the intro to drama background study of Sophocles and about the first 500 lines of the play, which we'll get through definitely by Friday.